Have you ever stopped to think about how incredibly complicated it is to join almost anything in our modern world? If you want to open a bank account, sign up for a gym, or even just download a new piece of software, you have to jump through endless hoops. You are hit with background checks, initiation fees, and those endless terms of service agreements that no one actually reads, but everyone is forced to accept. We are conditioned to believe that anything significant requires a massive bureaucratic barrier to entry.
That is such a fascinating observation, and it is entirely true. We live in a society of gatekeepers. The more exclusive or significant the club, the higher the wall built around it. We equate complexity with value. If something is hard to get into, we assume it must be worth our time. But when you look at the most profound transformations a human being can undergo, specifically entering a global faith shared by nearly a quarter of the world's population, that entire modern paradigm is completely flipped upside down.
Exactly, and that is exactly what we are diving into today, the process of embracing Islam. When you look at the actual requirements to become a Muslim, it is almost shocking in its simplicity. There is no membership fee, no lengthy initiation ritual, no panel of judges evaluating your worthiness. It all boils down to a single fundamental shift in perspective. Followed by a very brief verbal declaration. It is so simple that it almost feels counterintuitive to our modern minds. How does such a massive life change start with something so incredibly understated?
It starts there because the core of the philosophy is entirely internal. Before a single word is spoken, the transformation has actually already happened in the mind and the heart. The foundation is pure belief, the conviction that there is only one creator, one God, and the acceptance that the Prophet Muhammad was the final messenger sent to guide humanity. Once that internal realization clicks into place, the outward action is just a natural overflow of that truth.
And that outward action is what is known as the Shahada, right? The declaration of faith. But what does that actually look like in practice? If someone is sitting at home right now feeling that internal click you just mentioned, how do they bridge the gap between feeling it and actually taking the step?
The bridge is just a few words. The Shahada is a profoundly simple Arabic phrase. When translated, it is essentially a person testifying that they believe in nothing worthy of worship except God, and bearing witness that Muhammad is his messenger. That is it. That is the threshold. You can say it quietly in the privacy of your own bedroom. You can say it out loud while driving your car. Or you can say it surrounded by hundreds of people in a mosque. The setting is entirely secondary to the sincerity behind the words.
I want to pause on that word you just used, testifying. That is a heavy, legally binding kind of word. You do not just guess or think when you testify in a courtroom. You are stating a truth that you have witnessed and are willing to stand behind. Using that specific concept for a spiritual declaration gives it an incredible amount of weight, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that weight is entirely intentional. To testify is to take ownership of your reality. But what makes this so beautiful is that this testimony is completely free of coercion. In fact, a foundational principle of the faith is that belief cannot be forced. If someone were pressured or coerced into saying those words, the declaration would be entirely void. It is a lock that can only be opened from the inside. The absolute freedom of choice is what gives the Shahada its immense power. You are stepping up of your own free will and aligning your external voice with your internal truth.
That is a powerful image, a lock that can only be opened from the inside. But let us play devil's advocate for a moment. Because it is so simple to enter, does it run the risk of people taking it too lightly? If I just say a sentence and suddenly I am part of this massive global community, what happens on day 2? It feels a bit like enrolling in a prestigious university just by signing your name on a piece of paper. You are enrolled, sure, but you still have to pass the classes.
That is the perfect metaphor. Saying the Shahada is indeed like walking through the front doors of the university. You are officially a student, but the real work, the education, the growth, the transformation begins the very next morning. The simplicity of the entry does not negate the depth of the journey. Once you cross that threshold, you step into a lifelong curriculum of spiritual and physical discipline.
So what does that curriculum look like for someone who just woke up on their first day as a Muslim? Because I imagine it could feel incredibly overwhelming. You have just made this massive philosophical shift, but now you have to figure out how to actually live it out on a random Tuesday.
It can definitely feel daunting, which is why the progression is meant to be gradual. The immediate next step is usually learning the rhythm of daily life, which is anchored by the 5 daily prayers. But even before you pray, You have to learn how to prepare yourself physically and mentally through a specific washing process. It is a physical purification that mirrors the spiritual purification. You are literally washing away the noise of the world before you stand and connect with the Creator.
That physical act of washing, it forces you to slow down in a world where we are constantly rushing from one screen to another. Having a mandatory physical pause to wash your face and hands before you speak to God feels like a radical act of mindfulness.
It is incredibly radical. It pulls you out of the superficial and anchors you in the present moment. And from there, the learning expands. A new believer starts to engage with the Quran, taking it slowly, perhaps just listening to the recitation at first to feel the cadence and the peace it brings. Then comes the understanding of the broader pillars, like the physical discipline of fasting during Ramadan, and the social responsibility of giving a portion of your wealth to those in need.
It strikes me that this journey swings like a pendulum between the deeply personal and the highly communal. On one hand, you are alone in your thoughts, making this sincere declaration, washing yourself, reading quietly, but on the other hand, you are suddenly part of a global family. How important is it for someone new to the faith to find that community? Can they just do this entirely on their own?
While the belief itself is intensely personal, trying to navigate the practical application entirely alone is like trying to navigate a ship across the ocean without a compass or a crew. You might stay afloat for a while, but it is going to be incredibly difficult. Finding a local community, walking into a mosque, and simply connecting with people who have been walking this path longer is vital.
I imagine it takes a lot of vulnerability to walk into a new space like that and admit you do not know what you are doing. Hey, I just made this huge life decision, but I do not know how to pray yet. Can someone help me? That requires a lot of humility.
It does. But what most people find when they take that step is an overwhelming wave of support. There is a profound joy within the community when someone new enters. If someone is unsure of how to even pronounce the words of the declaration, they can just ask a friend or a community leader to sit with them, guide them through the pronunciation, and explain the very next steps. There is no judgment in being a beginner. In fact, the beginner's sincerity is often deeply inspiring to those who have been in the faith their whole lives.
That brings us to a really fascinating philosophical point. We live in an era characterized by a fear of commitment. People are hesitant to commit to a career, a city, a relationship, let alone a comprehensive way of life. Taking this step, making this declaration, is the ultimate act of commitment. It is saying, I am anchoring myself to this truth permanently.
Exactly. In a world of endless fleeting options, making a definitive choice is the ultimate rebellion. It is a rejection of the idea that we are just drifting through a random universe. By making that simple declaration, a person is claiming their purpose. They are acknowledging that the journey will not always be easy, that there will be days of struggle and confusion, but that the foundation beneath their feet is solid. It is an ongoing journey of growth, stumbling, learning, and returning.
It is a journey that starts with a whisper but echoes through an entire lifetime. The contrast between the sheer simplicity of the beginning and the infinite depth of the path that follows is truly something to marvel at. It challenges us to look at our own lives and ask what profound truths we might be overcomplicating.
It forces us to realize that the most monumental shifts in human existence do not require grand ceremonies or complex contracts. They just require a quiet moment of absolute honesty with oneself, and the courage to articulate that truth. The door is already unlocked. It is simply a matter of choosing to turn the handle and walk through.
A quiet moment of absolute honesty. I think that is a concept that will stick with anyone listening today, regardless of where they are on their own spiritual journey. The idea that the deepest changes start with the simplest, most sincere intentions. It leaves you wondering what doors are currently unlocked in your own life, just waiting for you to turn the handle.